And then we certainly see throughout since the 1970s, more and more so, we're reflecting and incorporating that into the way that we even proclaim who we are as Catholics. So faced with the widespread destruction of the environment, people everywhere are coming to understand that we cannot continue to use the goods of the earth as we have in the past. A new ecological awareness is beginning to emerge. The ecological crisis is a moral issue, and because of that, we as Catholics must respond. Some more documents, but in 1991, the Florida bishops, human beings are part of the environment, not separate from it. It's taken a long time for the U.S. Forest Service to even admit that, so I thought this was pretty good. And then we have some key things that are coming out. In Boston, I thought the Boston one was wonderful for us because the Boston province was taking a look at actual urban ecological issues and said ecological issues that are happening in urban areas, environmental injustices are rooted in our Catholic tradition, and we must as Catholics respond to those. This is the first time that we've really got to grasp on our responsibility for urban ecological issues. The need for ecological conversion, the conversion, of course, being a key word for us as Franciscans. People have been placed by God as the 2002 statement. People have been placed by God as administrators of the earth, and we're called to this ecological vocation. Even Pope Benedict has picked that up. He's getting dubbed by the New York Times as the Green Pope. I don't know if he intended to be called the Green Pope, but certainly it's continued on with the tradition from John Paul, and said every person and every family can and must do something to alleviate hunger in the world and adopting a lifestyle and consumption compatible with safeguarding creation. So already we're beginning to have some economic implications from our ecological lifestyles. And is a challenge even certainly to our first world lifestyles and even in the United States. So contemporary Catholic writers, again this is part of our tradition, these writers were adding to that story that we tell. And certainly there are many more, but these are just examples. I've got to throw in those couple token Franciscans there. Yeah. So here's a summary of those Catholic themes that'll take us into the Franciscan approach. So this is God's creation. Creation has intrinsic worth because God created it. Humans are earth creatures. That comes out of the creation story. We are of the earth, from the earth. We're going right back to the earth. God reflected and encountered all of creation. Therefore, by having a relationship with creation, we can encounter a living God. Our Christian imagery actually requires us to have a healthy ecosystem. I remember one time I preached on the story of the return of Christ after his death and resurrection, and he comes back on the beach. And I retold the story as if it was happening in an ecologically damaged system. And it didn't sound so good when we told that story without understanding that you need to have fish in order to tell that story. The water needs to actually, you need to be able to go into the water and have it produce fish to tell the story and have meaning. So a lot of our understanding of scriptural stories requires us to even have a relationship with nature. And then certainly we get down to the end, we have integration of scientific knowledge and theology, reason and faith. We don't have that struggle that some other Christian communities have, that's faith against reason. We have integrated those. And then some of the other themes, just we put together this ecological stewardship, caring for creation, but also recognize that it means environmental justice. What we do to the earth, we do to the least of the earth, we do to the others. As humans are stewards, we need to use those natural resources for the common good, and we need to look at, particularly, we're concerned about the impacts on children and the future. So, there is an environmental vocation, and we're called to ecological stewardship and environmental justice, and this comes out of a summary of our Catholic tradition. So, is there in that a unique Franciscan voice to this? Hint, yes, but we'll get to that. And I apologize for throwing this huge amount of quotation up here, but it's critical. Back in the 1960s, there was an author, Lynn White, scholar, who basically said that the ecological crisis was rooted in very, very bad Christian paradigms. And this has been a dialogue that's been going on for quite some time, even to this day. When I did my graduate work, they're still using his article in the secular arena. They say it's the responsibility of the church that caused this. They therefore cannot be the answer to some of our problems. Lynn White says, actually, because essentially, because the problem is a religious problem, it must have a religious answer. And he said at the end, very end of his article, which nobody ever covers, is there is a way out of this. And the way out of this is this little man named Francis of Assisi. Very proud to hear that when I was in a secular class talking about this. So St. Francis was rebelling when he came up with his way of doing things with the ecosystem. His distinctive attitudes toward nature, which are deeply grounded in Christian dogma, has meant that there are no new set of basic values that have been adopted or pushed forth through that Christian community since the Middle Ages. And because of that, we have a worsening ecological crisis. And then he goes on and says that the greatest spiritual revolutionary was Francis of Assisi. He's the one who offered an alternate view. Unfortunately, yes, he failed. There's no solution for our ecological crisis. Since the roots of our trouble is religious, and the remedy is religious, and he says, I want to point in one direction. If we could ever rediscover that Francis guy again, we've got the answer of where we need to move. Now, this was not a Catholic, by the way. He was a secular scholar. He was a believer. He was a Protestant, and he said that all that he has researched, this is his only hope for where we're going to go. There's a challenge for us. So what does Franciscan voice look like? Well, I've identified and simplified it down to three pieces. We have a Franciscan process. The way that we do things is essentially Franciscan, or not, but we hope that it is. We have a Franciscan environmental ethic, and then we have some Franciscan themes that emerge from our tradition. And when I say Franciscan, what I mean, it comes out of Francis and Clara, the early friars, out of the whole Franciscan family over the ages. I tend to like to go back to Francis because it's fun to do, and he's so inspirational. And within the Catholic family, he's quite the icon, so I tend to borrow quite a lot from Francis himself, but understand it's a much broader tradition. So a Franciscan process, what would that be if we looked at a human relationship with creation? Well, Francis does things a little backwards. He acts first, and then he sees, and then he becomes. Whereas our other tradition was, we kind of study it a little bit, we think about it, we change the way that we think about it, then we begin to act, and then we begin to become. And Francis didn't take any shortcuts. Just start doing it, and it will come. So he does it a little backwards, very active. The process of daily penance, this is what we call our Franciscan process of transformation. Every single day, we take a little step forward. It helps us to see a little bit more, become transformed a little more. As we're more transformed, we see a little bit better, and so forth. We also use narrative processes. A nice way that we say storytelling. We are the storytellers. If we cannot take all this information and put it into a story, it's not Franciscan. It also includes this radical awareness that the pursuit of truth includes many different ways of knowing. We can know in our heads, we can know in our hearts, we can know because we reach out and touch. That table is there, and I felt it. And then finally, the process is that information does not change people. Relationships change people. We are somewhat obsessed within the church of getting the right information out to people. If we simply give them the right books and the right papers, the right worksheets, then they will read it and you'll be transformed. But Francis and Claire picked up intuitively that it's not that information. So you take that information and put it on like clothing or like food in our bellies, it doesn't become human. Once you do that and make it human, it's people who change people. So this ethic, here's some elements to this ethic. And by the way, I simplified this. There are lots of other pieces to this, but we didn't have 8 hours to go through this. So I thought these were the most essential pieces here. The commitment to poverty today becomes for us a life of simplicity, living within our means, within our footprint. Humans and nature are interdependent, interconnected, which, by the way, he picked up intuitively. Today we have ecological science that completely confirms where he was going with this. Fulfillment is only through these right relationships, and he began to call all things, all people, brother and sister and mother. Environmental conflict is resolved through peacemaking and measured through the eyes that the processes of whether we're succeeding or not are measured through the eyes of the other, especially the poor.